Hey all, thanks for tuning in. Today I'm going to talk thoroughly about an agreement and its origins which took place before the failed Dardanelles campaign of 1915. This was the Constantinople Agreement. The Constantinople Agreement, or Straits Agreement, was a secret accord between Russia, the United Kingdom and France on the post-war division of the Central Ottoman Empire in the event of their defeat. The partition, signed on March 18, 1915, before the initiation of the Dardanelles campaign, would give Russia Constantinople, as long as they kept it an open port, and a portion rear to the Thracian and Asia Minor coasts. Russia had long desired this area, as it gave them direct naval access to the Mediterranean Sea, which they had been denied in the past. British and French claims for influence over the Middle Eastern countries were agreed upon by Russia. The United Kingdom, who wanted access to the much-desired oil in Mosul, wanted influence over Iraq and further east, while France wanted to occupy and influence Syria, Cilicia, which became a reality. The agreement also entailed independent Muslim governance in the Holy Land. The Russo-Turkish War was a war that took place between 1806 and 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars in the early years of the 20th century. Napoleon agreed to help the Ottoman Empire suppress a rebellious uprising regarding Serbia in exchange for the entry of exclusively French warships into the Dardanelles, and the denial of the Russian fleet, whom he had his eyes on. The Ottomans declared war on Russia, who were stationed in Moldavia and Wallachia in 1806, who, until this French-Ottoman agreement, had access to the Dardanelles and Sea of Marmara. Following the Battle of Parghita, Russia decided to make peace with the Ottomans, who were equally weary of Napoleon's intentions to annex and colonize in the east. Russia emerged victorious and the Ottomans signed the Treaty of Bucharest in May 1812. The Anglo-Turkish War, or Anglo-Ottoman War, took place between 1807 and 1809. During the time of the Russo-Turkish War, and because of the relationship between Russia and the United Kingdom via the Fourth Coalition, also including Prussia, Saxony and Sweden, the United Kingdom requested that Sultan Selim III surrender the Ottoman fleet and break the alliance with the French. After Sultan Selim III denied the British requests, Vice Admiral Sir John Thomas Duckworth of the British Navy entered the Dardanelles on February 19, 1807, destroying an Ottoman naval force. As agreed upon, the French assisted the Ottomans in repelling the British naval invasion. 2 British ships were lost and Duckworth turned the fleet around in defeat on March 3, 1807. The turnaround of the British fleet in Constantinople reflects their persistence of the Ottoman Empire from 1807 all the way through to 1915. In order to get a foothold on the Ottomans, after the naval defeat, 5,000 British troops occupied Alexandria in Egypt in mid-March 1807. The British failed and were expelled by Ottoman forces led by Khedive Muhammad Ali. The Anglo-Turkish War would continue intermittently until 1809, following the Treaty of the Dardanelles. With Napoleon's victory in the Battle of Friedland, part of the War of the Fourth Coalition, the possibility of a French invasion into Russia eluded to Emperor Alexander I of Russia. Rather than face an invasion, the Tsar ended his involvement in the Fourth Coalition and signed one of the treaties of Tilsit on July 7, 1807, the other one signed by France and Prussia. The Treaty of the Dardanelles, also known as the Treaty of Chanak, or the Dardanelles Treaty of Peace, was agreed upon by the Ottoman Empire and United Kingdom in Chanak on January 5, 1809. The treaty acted as an armistice which ended the Anglo-Turkish War. The terms of the treaty entailed the protection of British ports, naval bases, trade, and diplomatic relations via Ottoman assistance in the Mediterranean Sea, especially from the Russian fleet in the northeastern Black Sea. Terms of the treaty also affirm that no warships enter the Dardanelles or Bosphorus Straits, and that British assistance is provided if the French were to attack the Ottoman Empire. The First Egyptian-Ottoman War, also called the First Turco-Egyptian War or First Syrian War, was an Egyptian revolt led by Muhammad Ali of Egypt in 1831 against the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Muhammad II at the time. The revolt began as an Egyptian repercussion of not being given Greater Syria, which it was promised when assisting the Ottomans in the Greek War of Independence. Nearing the end of the war, Egypt was winning. Although nothing stood in the way of the Egyptian general, Ibrahim Pasha, and Ottoman Constantinople, his army was bogged down in the cold long enough for the Ottoman Porte to form an alliance with Russia, who sent troops to Anatolia towards Constantinople in order to scare the advancing Egyptians. Aware of how Moscow could influence the Ottomans, the United Kingdom and France pressured the Convention of Carteia, easing tensions between Egypt and the Ottomans in May 1833. This agreement gave Syrian provinces to Egypt, with Ibrahim Pasha as governor. The Second Egyptian-Ottoman War, also called the Second Turco-Egyptian War, took place between 1839 and 1841. The Convention of London was an agreement between the United Kingdom, Austria, Prussia, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire to end the Second Egyptian-Ottoman War. It entailed handing permanent control of Syria over to Muhammad Ali of Egypt, who in return must pull all of his forces out of the Ottoman Empire. At first, Muhammad Ali declined the offer and continued fighting, until the Oriental Crisis of 1840, when the United Kingdom and Austria attacked Egyptian forces in Accra, forcing them out and pressuring Ali to give in to the agreement. The convention was formally signed on July 15, 1840. The Second Egyptian-Ottoman War would not have been a complete failure, as it secured Egypt as privileged Ottoman province. Karl Veselvik wanted to make the Ottoman Empire dependent on Russia. Karl Veselvik assisted in forming a relation with Turkey, which was abandoned to form an alliance with Britain. Alexei Fyodorovic also played a pivotal role in forming relations and had influence over the Treaty of Hunka-Iskelesi when he became ambassador to Constantinople in 1833. The Treaty of Hunka-Iskelesi was signed in 1833, permitting Imperial Russian vessels through, and no foreign vessels of war to enter therein under any pretext whatsoever. However, this was a secret agreement between Imperial Russia and the Ottoman Empire. It is known to essentially make the Ottoman Empire a protectorate under Russia. The London Straits Convention, or London Straits Agreement, was agreed upon by the great powers of Europe, the United Kingdom, France, Austria, Prussia, and Russia on July 13, 1841, in order to close the Bosphorus and Dardanelles Straits, and the Sea of Marmara between them, linking the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. The agreement was made to stop any warships from entering the Mediterranean or from Russia exiting the Black Sea with warships, and was done so in response to the confidential Treaty of Hunka-Iskelesi, or the Treaty of Unkiar-Skelesi, which gave Russia passage. The London Straits Agreement was essentially a broader version of the Treaty of the Dardanelles previously signed by the United Kingdom and the Ottoman Empire. Although this was to give Western powers equal disadvantages of Russia, it would lead to tension and Russia's stronger desire for the Straits. The Second Russo-Turkish War between 1877 and 1878 led Russia to push the Ottomans all the way to Constantinople until Western intervention. Russia gained territory in the Caucasus but did not end up with the Constantinople Straits. Eventually, the 1915 Constantinople Agreement was never carried out as the Dardanelles campaign ended in defeat for the Triple Entente. Russia, who was in the middle of a civil war by the end of the First World War and grew to share resentment with the United Kingdom and France, withdrew from the war and eventually repealed any agreements the Tsar had previously agreed to. However, before the overthrow of the imperialist Russia by the Bolsheviks, Tsar Nicholas II gave his assent to the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was a later agreement between France and Britain discussing the partition of the Ottoman Empire, similar to the earlier Constantinople Agreement. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and keep tuned for the next episode.